Eagles fans love what Jalen Hurts is doing at $2 million a year. Now, you attach a $35 million price tag. Are Eagles fans going to be as happy with the results and the product that they're seeing? Are you going to feel comfortable doling out that kind of money to a Jalen Hurts?
I will. I think fans and some of the pundits won't, but I think you have to understand quarterbacks are going to get paid what they get paid. So when you start talking about what Wentz makes, I think Jared Goff makes $32 million. So at that point, when you start talking about that number, it's going to be there regardless.
Vikings week, Monday Night Football. The link is going to be packed. It's going to be rowdy. It's going to be on and popping at the gallery down at the Ocean Casino for pre and post game. And Glenn Erby will be on location for your Philadelphia Eagles. He joins us right now on the Football Playbook. Of course, USA Today, Eagles Wire. Good morning, Glenn. How are we doing today?
Good, Rick. How you feeling this morning?
You know what? I'm feeling like this is going to be a close matchup with the Vikings. On paper, I don't know if the Eagles have a clear advantage. I think they're two very evenly matched teams, and I want to get your perspective on that. But first, let's get your recap on with the Lions game. We haven't had you on since the week one affair. I know you handed out some grades over there on the Eagles Newswire. So tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like. Tell me the Glenn Erby recap of the Eagles-Lions week one matchup.
Well, I think on offense, we all liked what Jalen Hurts was able to do. I think, he was steady. I mean, you'll have some say he had an up and down performance, but I think, he didn't turn the ball over. He didn't have too many negative plays. You liked what you saw with him and A.J. Brown. That was expected. I don't like what I saw with Devontae having no catches and Quez having no targets. So I think that's something that they'll eventually have to clean up. And I think that's more about play calling and scheme and things of that nature. I like the way Miles Sanders ran the ball. I think he ran with physicality. I think he's out to prove a point. So I can appreciate that. I like the way the offensive line played. I like the way Shane Steichen called the game. So on offense, everything was pretty solid. I think most of the disappointment or concern, comes from the defensive side of the ball, and that's the missed tackles, the passive zone coverage, things of that nature.
Yeah, and we talked about 15 missed tackles, most in the NFL.
Correct.
And that's a byproduct of the Club Med atmosphere that Ric Serritella installed in training camp, is it not?
I think so, and I think some of that is about coaching and effort as well. I mean, I think the players did a good job of taking ownership of what happened. I think, Jonathan Gannon, he can put them in the proper scheme. He can put them all in the proper position. But if they don't make tackles, they don't make plays, then it's all for naught anyway. So I think you'll see a better job in week two. But like you said, the starters only played one series, I think, this preseason. So I think it'll take a couple of games for the defense to catch up.
Yeah, and remember they did that split squad scrimmage with the Dolphins down there in Miami. They had one of the days canceled because the Dolphins caught some kind of illness. So that was really supposed to be some live in-game reps for the starters. And so they got cheated that day. But to me, it goes back to, like, you want to hold 60-minute practices, really? Don't be surprised when the heat comes at you and why we're looking at each other like, hey, what's going on? Well, and I don't think it's just an Eagles problem. It's an NFL problem because a lot of teams are guilty of this, but the Eagles are most guilty because they were the worst tackling defense in the NFL last year. And as you know, Glenn, Dalvin Cook ain't nothing to play with.
No, not at all. And I think they'll definitely have to get that cleaned up. I think when you look back on the prior 3 or 4 years, they were one of the most injured teams in the league. So the assumption was as soon as Sirianni came, that was going to change. So I think from a health standpoint, you can feel good about the fact that we entered the last 2 seasons as one of the healthier teams in the NFL. But from a tackling standpoint, a fundamental standpoint, that has to get cleaned up because that's something Sirianni preaches and he harps on.
Yeah, well, you got to the start line healthy, but you just lost a player for the year, maybe because you didn't hit, maybe because they weren't ready, maybe because they were playing timid in training camp. So Derek Barnett is down. I saw you wrote an article about Janarius Robinson, who they signed off of the Vikings practice squad.
Correct.
I gave a little scouting report on him coming out of Florida State. What is your take? Was this to sign up and play, or was this to sign up and gather intel?
I think a little bit of both. I think over the last 2 seasons, you see how it was when the Eagles turning more towards pedigree. So no more taking shots on or trying to be the smartest guy in the room. At this point, Robinson went to FSU. You know there's pedigree there. You know there's history there. He didn't stuff the stat sheet, but he's athletic. He's a taller version of Josh Sweat, if you could say. So from that standpoint, there's potential there. And he was drafted 4th and 5th round, in the same area of Milton Williams and those guys. So there is potential plus intel as well. A little bit of both, I think.
We got Glenn Erby here, USA Today Eagles Newswire. Glenn, put your Jonathan Gannon thinking cap on here for week 2, and let's just talk about that defensive line that was, quite frankly, a disgrace and an embarrassment, I felt. Right. And you were a very generous grader, by the way. I think you gave him a C with your marks. I gave him an F because, to me, there's so much money invested in that defensive line to not show up and get gashed the way they did and get carried into the end zone on some of those runs and get manhandled by third-string guards. Like, that's just unacceptable. So I don't think Janarius Robinson is going to be up to speed to play this week. They've got to figure out this defensive line rotation, both on the interior and on the outside.
Correct.
How does Glenn Erby play? Do you put one of these inside guys out on the edge if need be? Do you play Jordan Davis more? Is Teron Jackson getting elevated from the practice squad? Like, there's some tinkering that needs to be done with this defensive line.
I think so. And I think before we move to week 2, we have to understand that even though we're talking about the Lions, the bookend tackles are pretty good. So you have Sewell, he's good. Taylor Decker's a pretty good tackle. So I think from that standpoint, we may have overreacted a bit in terms of the lack of pass rush and things like that. But I think this week, in terms of obvious rundowns, you have to play Jordan Davis more than 22 downs. He's an athletic player, so we don't necessarily have to have him in there on obvious rundowns either. But he has to play more than 22. So even if you take 2 snaps from Hargrave, you take 2 snaps from Fletcher, that's 4. That gets him close to 30. I think you have to rush Hassan Reddick more as a pass rusher. He dropped in the coverage 3 or 4 times, and that's fine. You don't want to show your hand, but you have to utilize him and have him do what he does best. I think you'll see Teron Jackson get elevated this week, or he'll be active. He's a pretty good pass rusher as well. So I think Gannon last year did a good job of responding when facing adversity, responding the following week after a disaster. So I think you'll see a more aggressive unit, and they'll have to be more aggressive, especially, with Kirk. You can't let Kirk Cousins stand back there and just pick you apart.
No, that's exactly right. And you've got to pressure this man. And I hope he watched some of this Vikings game from last week, because this is not a world beater offensive line by any means.
Correct.
They and it's all homegrown. They don't have a guy older than 27. Every pick on this offensive line was a 1st or 2nd round pick. Now, they haven't exactly played to that level. Right. Garrett Bradbury is teetering bust label. They flirted with J.C. Treader in the offseason. Bradbury's been a disaster. Ed Ingram, the rookie out of LSU, a lot of responsibility placed on him as a rookie starter. They just bull rushed him, from my understanding, and he allowed a lot of pressure on the interior. And again, the interior of this defensive line, or the offensive line for the Vikings, is a big weakness. If the Eagles don't blitz more, well, then the seat must get hotter for Jonathan Gannon, no?
I think so. I think, he's really stuck with the idea that he has a defensive line rotation, and that's fine. I just think that the idea of Jordan Davis being the last defensive tackle in that rotation is ludicrous, and not just because he's a 1st-round pick, but maybe because he's the most athletic and the most powerful of all 5. So he has to get more reps. I think you have to have a situation where there's more pressure off the edge, and then you'll have the situation where the edge rushers and the defensive tackles, they all complement each other. And he may not have to blitz that much, but he definitely has to get pressure from Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham could play a few more plays as well. I know he's coming back from Achilles injury.
Yeah, and you mentioned, talk about the defensive line and Hassan Reddick, kind of playing on that line of scrimmage. And you mentioned tipping the hand on the defensive scheme.
Correct.
Pending alignments. I know Justin Jefferson, oh, by the way, averaged 20 yards per catch and had a pair of touchdowns last week. Like, you're not going to stop him. You can only hope to contain him, right? But The big thing with Jefferson is he moves around. Like, almost every single snap, he's in a different side. He's inside, he's outside, he's left, he's right. I understand, like, you want to have Darius Slay on him as much as possible, but you talked about tipping the hand. Like, if Jefferson's moving all over the field and Slay is following him, then maybe the Eagles are tipping their hand defensively. How do you play that matchup? Do you want Slay on Jefferson no matter what because he's your top cover corner? Or if Jefferson slides in the slot, you cool with Avonte Maddox manning him up? Like, how do you play that situation?
I think in certain situations we're okay with Slay traveling. I think last week the Vikings in 60% of their, maybe 60 to 70% of their situations, they ended up getting Jefferson on a linebacker or safety. So no matter what the Eagles do, they definitely can't do that. So it can't be a situation where it's Marcus Epps or it's Kaiser White or it's someone one-on-one. So if you have a situation where it's Maddox, you can play that out, leave Slay and Bradbury on the corners, allow Maddox to play him, but make sure you have either Epps or Gardner Johnson over the top. So I think it's just a situation of where you account for him, but don't allow him to be one-on-one with linebackers or safeties.
Good points. I'd be scared if that happens. That's probably why Jefferson shredded them so much. If he's matched up on linebackers and safeties, it's just about game over. He can mail it in. Speaking of safeties, you mentioned Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who I thought played very well considering the circumstances. Only 10 days in town, played the majority of the snaps. I would even argue for as much good as Marcus Epps had, there were some plays there that concerned me. How do you kind of grade the save? What kind of grade did you give the secondary in your week 1 grades there on the Eagles Newswire?
I like them both. I gave the secondary a B. Of course, I think the corners played well. I think you have a situation where Maddox may have had his worst game as a pro from a tackling standpoint, so you want to clean that up. Epps struggled some in coverage, but we like his physicality. So I think you'll see a situation where as C.J. Gardner-Johnson continues to pick up the defense and they put him in a situation where he's able to flourish, you'll see him more in coverage, allow Epps to be more in the box. But in terms of the overall 5, and then you include McPherson, it's a really solid group. But I think it's just about tackling better and Epps doing better in pass coverage.
Yeah, you mentioned McPherson, NFC Special Teams Player of the Week there. And, the other guy on defense I want to ask you about is Nakobe Dean. I mean, this guy, outside of the injury, was considered a first-round talent. The Georgia coaches raved about his DNA, his football acumen, very cerebral player. Why? I mean, what are you hearing? What do you think? Why is he only getting on the field for 3 snaps? I get he's a rookie, but shouldn't he be further along than this?
That's not necessarily. I mean, the Eagles have good depth, and they have really solid depth at the linebacker position now. So for the first time in years, maybe 20 years, it's not a bad problem to have. So I think it's a situation where for most of the summer preseason, T.J. Edwards was probably the one or number 2, it's the top defensive player on that unit anyway. So it's not as Dean did not play him, and we're not going to give Dean his spot for no reason. So it's a good thing. If he had to start, then we'd be sitting there criticizing for not being able to shed blocks and different things like that. So I think Edwards is outstanding at middle linebacker. He's improved in pass coverage. Kaiser White was solid. He played a huge part in the pick 6, do a big block after deflecting the pass, did well in the running game. So I think it's a situation where you'll see Nakobe Dean play more. Injuries happen. You could put him out on the wheel as well as he gets better at pass rush. Maybe you can play him at Sam also. But I think it's just his first game. Same with Jordan Davis. They're rookies. They'll get more playing time.
Yeah, and I think on that Kaiser White tipped pass that Bradbury returned to the house, I believe Marlon T was in on the pass rush there.
Correct. He's improved also.
Yeah, and the Eagles blitzed, and they created a turnover off of the blitz. And that's what we need to see more of, Mr. Gannon, right? I mean, all eyes to me going into week 2. Philadelphia is a pressure market. That's part of the gig when you sign the bottom line. Correct. It comes with the territory. I think there's more pressure on Jonathan Gannon than any member of the organization in week 2. Agree or disagree?
I think so. I mean, I think the first year you allow some of those things to happen because they didn't have the personnel. That personnel has been upgraded. So I understand he has a certain way that he likes to play. They like to keep things in front, prevent the big play. That's fine. But when you still try to do that and give up 35 points, there's going to be a discussion. So we get past the whole coaching candidate thing. Keep things in front of you, but they have to make stops. They have to get off the field and third down, and they can't give up 35 to Minnesota.
Last question about the Lions, Glenn. I'm curious what your thoughts are because the Eagles blew them out of the water last year, 44-6, right? This year, a lot of optimism, Hard Knocks hype, sold-out crowd. week 1 in Detroit. Are we knocking the Eagles too much? Like, is this Lions team a better product than a year ago? Are you buying into what Dan Campbell's selling up there in Detroit?
For sure, they're a much better team. They're a much physical team. On offense, they're kind of the same on offense, but on defense, they're much more physical. Aiden Hutchinson played well. He didn't have the numbers, but in terms of his pressure, they moved him all along the line of scrimmage. The middle linebacker, Rodrigo from Hard Knocks, he played well. He was physical at the point of attack. So they played well. The Eagles, I think, blew a 17-point lead or twice got up by as much as 17. So from that standpoint, it should have been over by the half, maybe the early third quarter. But they're an ascending team, and they'll have more wins than they did last year. So they played well, but I think it was also a situation where you had a defense that hadn't played together in a game atmosphere for the first time. The Ford Field was sold out. So a lot of things went into it, but it's good to see that we faced adversity well. They persevered. Jalen Hurts was under control, and they'll get it figured out.
Yeah, I think they took the Lions' best shot, right? They got punched in the mouth, and they withstood it. So at the end of the day, the most common phrase I heard out of a W is a W, right? We'll take it. And you're off and running, 1-0. Glenn Erby here from the Eagles Newswire, Ric Serritella, Football Playbook, breaking it down, chopping it up. Let's turn the page over to the offense, Glenn. You mentioned Jalen Hurts played well. I agree. We saw in the presser, the common theme seems to be like, hey, let's not overcomplicate things here for Jalen, which is okay. And I heard Steichen even say yesterday, like, we're really not asking him to do more than 2 or 3 reads. And that third read, a lot of times, tucking it and running it is the better option than progressing to your third read. Are you cool with this for the rest of the year? Do you want to see more pocket passing, or would you rather just say, hey, this is what it is? If Jalen's got to run it 17 times a game, we're going to run with that until the wheels fall off, and that's just what our offense is.
I'm fine. I think the Eagles have to determine if they're fine this year and going forward. If you want a Justin Herbert type passer or a pocket passer, then you may have to, check out CJ Stroud or, wait for the draft. If you're okay with the quarterback being efficient, taking what the defense gives him and putting you in the best chance to win, that's what he did. So, I mean, the conversation during the summer and last season was about him taking off too early. For the most part, he didn't do that. He ran when he had to. He ran when the play broke down, and the plays were efficient and they were positive plays. So I think it's a situation of Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman trying to figure out what they want from the quarterback position and how they want it to go. But in terms of if you want a Lamar Jackson or if you want to approach it the way the Ravens do and you just want to win and it's just about winning, let him do what he do. Now, he definitely needs to figure out how to get his other receivers involved, and I think a lot of that was just about the defense and what was given to him. But in terms of being efficient, not having negative plays, he didn't turn the ball over. He did what he had to do.
Well, I think that's the big thing with Jalen Hurts. He's a smart decision maker, does not turn the ball over very often.
Correct.
Now, there was some miscues there in week 1. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. It was loud. It was week 1. A couple times they had, I think, 12 men in the huddle. A couple times the play clock ran down. Hey, week 1, we're working out the kinks. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. But, we talk about on paper this Vikings team very evenly matched up. I look at Kirk Cousins, and half of me says, how the hell is this guy making $40 million a year? The other half of me says, well, if you want competent quarterback play, you got to overpay. And I say competent with a grain of salt because coming into the year, this guy was 59-2, career 500 quarterback. Jalen Hurts is a winning quarterback. However, I think they gave him the extension, 1-year extension during the offseason. So he's making $40 million this year, $30 million next year, comes out to, $35 million a year. Eagles fans love what Jalen Hurts is doing at $2 million a year. Now you attach a $35 million price tag. Are Eagles fans going to be as happy with the results and the product that they're seeing? Are you going to feel comfortable doling out that kind of money to a Jalen Hurts?
I will. I think fans and some of the pundits won't, but I think you have to understand quarterbacks are going to get paid what they get paid. So when you start talking about what Wentz makes, I think Jared Goff makes $32 million. So at that point, when you start talking about that number, it's going to be there regardless. So I think it's a situation of what you want and how you want it. If you want him to win, if you want wins, he's going to give you that. He's not going to turn the ball over. If you want the ball thrown all over the field, massive passing numbers, you may have to take a look at that. But I think when you talk about Kirk Cousins, he's a pretty solid quarterback. He gives you a chance to win at best. Now, you'll have to put a defense around him. You'll have to make sure he's not pressured from the outside. But in terms of you're giving you a quarterback that gives you a chance to win with a nice arm, that's what he does.
Yeah, and you have to overpay. That's just the bottom line because this guy, I mean, he's 33 years old, I think. Believe it or not, he's won 10 games once in his whole entire career. He's won 10 games just once. So, you mentioned Carson Wentz. He's on a 4-year deal for $128 million.
And it's a discount for whatever team has him.
You're right. And so the Eagles chose Hurts over Wentz. So at the very minimum, if they're going to look to extend Hurts after this year,
it's got to be at least $32 million plus $1. So whatever, you're going to start at 32.1.
You're right. So that's the starting point, probably even higher than that. 4 years, $128 million. It's like, if I'm Nicole Lynn, Jalen Hurts' agent, it's like, wait a second. You guys picked Jalen over Carson. So he's got to be worth more than Carson, and Carson Wentz is getting paid.
And I think that's the decision the Eagles have to make. And that's why I said you have weapons on offense. You have a ton of weapons on offense. Now they have to take a look and decide if they want a quarterback that'll just win, baby, or do you want to let him move on? And now you're talking about a new quarterback on a rookie deal. And you still have 4 years of another quarterback on a rookie deal with awesome talent around him. So it's going to be interesting, and it won't be decided over the next few weeks. This is going to play out, and he's going to have to pass for over 4,000 yards, I think. He's going to have to win a playoff game. Like, he's going to really have to make Howard Roseman feel like he can't get a better passer in this upcoming draft.
And they start rattling off some wins in the playoffs. That's going to be
that's different. Now we're getting up to close to $40 million. So he has the chance to make a lot of money, or he'll just be, a regular guy. So it's all on him.
All right, let's keep it on offense. Obviously, the passing attack needs to, divvy up the targets a little bit better there. I think that'll work its way out naturally over time.
For sure.
What about the backfield by committee situation? I thought Boston Scott played a little bit, more than anticipated. Usually he's a guy that gets more involved when there's injuries. We saw him right out of the gate, 4 players, 4 different rushing touchdowns. Hasn't happened in 60 years. Do you think this is the best way to maximize Miles Sanders' durability and dependability?
Kind of, yes. I think the idea is you would hope that, like I said, he's motivated, and you hope that 96 yards last week, he comes out and gets another 96. He's never had a 1,000-yard season. Like, he averages 5-point-something yards per carry. He's averaging 6.8 yards per carry now. He's never went over 1,000. So I think the idea and the hope is that he just takes it, and you can give him 20 carries a game, and we'll see what happens. Because even if he does get hurt, you have Boston Scott, you have Gainwell, and you still have Trey Sermons on the roster. And this offense, like we talked about a few weeks ago, the offensive line is the best in the league. It's going to travel. It's going to go anywhere. So you technically can run with anyone as long as the line is healthy. So you would like for him to just take it by the hope that take the reins, become this 1,200-yard back, and you can pay him too. But it'll work itself out regardless, committee or Sanders.
Yeah, you mentioned the offensive line, as good as it gets. They all played 100% snaps. Unlike the defensive line, who was gassed,
right,
the offensive line was ready to go, rip-roaring ready to go. And now, I alluded to it earlier in the show before you popped on, Ed Donatel comes in, changes this Viking scheme from Mike Zimmer's 4-3 to a new 3-4.
Correct.
They've got a very rotational defensive front with Danielle Hunter, who we saw a big sack last week, Zadarius Smith, also a sack last week. He's kind of the juice of this defense, but you've got 2 pass rushers now in this new Vikings vaunted 34 defense. Oh, by the way, Harrison Smith in the back end, the only player in the NFL with 30 interceptions and 15 sacks, as good as it gets when it comes at safety. How do you kind of game plan for this pass rush. There's only 1 week of film on it, so what you got last week is really all you can prepare for. Otherwise, it's kind of a little bit unknown coming into this matchup.
I think it's a situation where you'll let Lane Johnson do what he does at right tackle, so you don't really have to help him. You may have to give Sumalo some help. You could lean some way towards Mailata last week because he struggled somewhat with Hutchinson's speed and strength off the edge. But I think in terms of picking up any type of blitz or any type of pass rush, they'll be fine. I think you'll see Harrison Smith play Jalen Hurts' personal shadow this week. So I think you'll look for that in terms of him walking down into the box, being Hurts' spy. But other than that, I think they'll bring their pressure. They'll see what they can do in terms of rattling, but too much pressure allows him to get out. So I think you may also see a situation where they hold up on the pass rush some and see if he can win from the pocket. So I think you'll see that early on first.
Oh, by the way, before we let you go, I got to mention our good friend Jordan Hicks. Did you see him last week? I mean,
I did.
What's going on? Is he drinking from the fountain of youth? Like 14 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, a quarterback hit. Like Jordan Hicks might have been their best player last week.
I think if you take away the injury concerns he had here, he's been pretty durable. After he left here, he went to Arizona. He lost out on the numbers game and went to the Vikings. So like we talked about earlier, he had durability issues here. From there, it's him, Kendricks. It's a pretty good defense. So we'll see. It'll be a pretty good matchup.
Yeah, Hicks and Kendricks, man, in the middle there in that new 34 scheme. This is going to be a heck of a matchup, Glenn. I know we won't have you back until next week. 2.5 says Vegas. How does Glenn Erby see it?
Monday Night Football. I think Hassan Reddick's home. A.J. Brown's hype. I think the Eagles' offense is spectacular. I think if Hurts can simply just make sure to keep his other guys involved, there's nothing they can't do. But I think Cousins can be had on the road. He'll be on the road. And I like the Eagles 35-31 in the shootout.
Okay. Another high-scoring affair. Oh, by the way, Reddick had a monster game against the Vikings last year for Carolina. Indeed. Hopefully he rekindles that magic because only place I saw him was on the back of my milk carton eating cereal, Glenn. Always a pleasure to have you on. What do you got going on? What's coming up at the Eagles Newswire there on USA Today?
A long week of Vikings hype. So most of the day tomorrow will be about Justin Edwards, letting the fans rekindle and think about what could have been. I mean, we do have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but if he'd just put that card in and not worried about who could play the slot and Carson Wentz could still be here, it could just be a whole different situation. But a whole lot of, Vikings hype, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Breaker, just previewing the game.
All right, well, we'll come back next week. We'll pop you on. We'll talk about it. We'll break it down. We'll chop it up. And we always appreciate the time, Glenn.
Appreciate you having me, Rick. Thank you.